Hi, everyone. So this week, I want to talk about the use of structure and experimentation in creative nonfiction, which is one of my favorite parts, if not my favorite part, about creative nonfiction. So when we think about structure, there are two different parts to it. Part is macro structure, which is that large scale structure, how the essay is organized on the page, basically what it looks like, either on the page or on the screen when you're reading it. How is it put together? And micro structure, which is the structure within that macro, things like language and sentence structure. Um, Both are very integral into how the reader experiences the essay, but for our purpose today, I'm just going to focus on macro structure. Another way to think of it is the form of the essay, the physical aspect of it. Basically, it's how is information organized and how does the essay handle space and time. Um, as far as like location, space, but also space on the page. How much space does it take up? Is it structured like a regular essay? Is there extra white space, which is extra spacing between paragraphs or sections of the essay? Um, Things like that. And also timing. Is it chronological? Does it bounce back and forth in time? When I was in grad school, I went to a lecture by Rebecca Walker. She's the daughter of Alice Walker and also the author of the book Black, White, and Jewish. But she was talking about how when you're looking at a piece of prose, especially creative nonfiction, what you're learning is how the writer's mind is working. Basically, when you're looking at the structure or the form of an essay or a memoir or anything like that, you are getting an idea of how they think about these things that they're writing about, how they think about their topic, how their mind processes it. Because of that, there's no one right way or wrong way to handle structure because all of us have different minds, different brains. We think in different ways. And and also when we write multiple pieces, we probably think differently about different topics. And maybe even differently about the same topic, but at different times in our life. Um, but basically, for a quick definition, we're going to talk about structure and form as what the essay looks like on the page. I'm going to talk about some different versions, some more common uses of structure as we continue on today. But please understand that there is no right way or wrong way, and there may be ways of structuring an essay that aren't listed that work for you, and that's absolutely okay. The first I'll talk about is a narrative with a lift, or kind of like a staircase. It's chronological, so it starts at the beginning of the event that the writer is writing about, and it ends at the end of the event or the series of events. It avoids extraneous information and provides answers to a question. An example of that is Terry Tempest Williams' The Clan of One-Breasted Women, which you'll be reading next week. Here you can see the essay a little bit. She talks about how she belongs to a clan of one-breasted women who are women that have had mastectomies because of breast cancer. And then she talks about her own. And she focuses a little bit of her family history with breast cancer, but also because they've been in Utah since 1847. And then she just keeps going from there. She doesn't say this is what's going on now and this is what's going on then. She may bounce back a little bit to allow herself to reflect on the instances that she's talking about, but she overall is talking from the beginning of her family's journey with breast cancer to the end where she's summarizing what they're doing. I don't want to give too much of the essay away, but this is something to think about. Think about as you start going forward and looking at different essays yourself. So when you read this next week, just keep in mind that this is an instance of a staircase with a lift. Another way to look at, which is kind of like The opposite of the narrative with a lift is the whirl of reflection. So whereas that first one was structured by time, a whirl of reflection is structured by topic. It meanders around a subject and it's trying to come to some sort of answer, or thinking, or the writer is trying to think about a topic or a situation from multiple angles. And here the journey is more important than the answer. One of the most famous examples is Zora Neale Hurston's How It Feels to Be Colored Me. This isn't an essay assigned for us this semester, but if you wanted to pull up this PowerPoint, there is a link to it. It's a short essay and I think it's worth reading, especially when you talk about like language, but also structure. She's talking about how it feels to her to be a Black woman, and she's coming at it from different areas. It's not structured by time. Another example is Crystal Wilkinson's praise song for the kitchen ghosts that you read last week. She's talking about this idea of the existence of Black people in Appalachia, but she's coming at it from the topic of food, and the food that has filtered its way into both her family's diet and how it reminds her of the situation of her topic. So she starts by talking about her cousin Deborah, and then she has a recipe where she's giving her cousin a recipe for greens without fat back. And then she talks about her grandmother and cooking in the middle of the day. So it's not so much structured by time, but it's structured by person and meal to create a full picture of the experience she's trying to convey to the reader. Third one I'll talk about is segmented. This is separated by scenes and subtopics, and they're connected by a theme. So it can be very similar to a whirl of reflection. The difference is that with these, they might have different types of sections. It may not all appear like a straightforward narrative. Some may have headers, some may be separated by white space. And some of these, you can find book length ones that are both segmented and also borrow like a hermit crab structure, which we'll talk about later in this presentation. There's a book by Nicholas Flynn called Another Bullshit Night in Suck City that has chapters that are different, very experimental, but the book itself is very segmented. Some of these essays or shorter pieces can be referred to as collage or braided essays or narratives, because they will have a paragraph and then some white space and then another paragraph or section, and it goes back and forth in time and space, and it's tying together different experiences. Lifeless by Elizabeth Felicetti, which you read last week, is one of these essays. She starts by talking about birders and how they make lists, and then the rules, and then she talks about, and then she has an actual list of rules. And then she goes and she talks about her parents and how they loved birds even though they didn't keep lists. And then there's more white space, and she talks about dealing with pain, personal pain, and her job as a clergy. So it kind of goes back and forth. And she's bringing a lot of stuff in here, but she's using the structure of a list to try to organize it in a very segmented fashion. Another structure that's really common is called dipping into the well. This is very similar to a whirl of reflection. The biggest difference is that a whirl of reflection always has a consistent main thread. A dipping into the well always has a consistent thread, so it's going in one direction. It just kind of meanders as it gets there, kind of like this oxbow lake here. And you'll dip into moments of reflection about the topic. Another essay by Elizabeth Felicetti, Improve Your Writing by Watching Reality Television, does this. She's talking primarily about watching reality TV and writing, but she dips into conversations with her husband. Then she'll dip into reflecting about how unfair it is that we consider reality television like a lesser form of entertainment. These can be chronological or non-chronological. Basically, it's you have a thread and you kind of go off the path a little bit and then come back. And then you have appropriated and or hermit crab essays. These are some of my favorites. And this is where creative nonfiction can get as experimental as you want it to. So if you've seen a hermit crab anywhere at a pet store or anywhere like that, basically you'll notice that their shells look very different than other animals. Whereas like a snail or a turtle, their shell kind of grows with them. A hermit crab takes on shells from other animals. Sometimes they'll take Coke as shells, which is why it's important to not pollute at the beach, all sorts of things. And they do that to protect the soft shell of their body. That's what these essays do. They're taking their shell from something that's not an essay and a way of trying to force order out of chaos. They don't look like essays. They look like basically anything but its stereotypical essay. And the goal is that you can force order out of chaos this way. If you have a lot of information about a big, complicated topic, sometimes the way to make sense of it is by trying to force yourself to restrict or narrow it down. And you can do that by taking a structure that requires a certain amount of space. I've seen essays that have been written as liner notes for an album or playlists when writing about music. One was about, I read an interesting essay a few years ago by, I think it was Bernard Strand, where he's talking about different books and he made it look like a works cited page. Probably more like an annotated bibliography because he had a paragraph about each book. And some that go even further than that. There's an essay by an author, Dinty Moore, that takes place on Google Maps, where you have to click different locations to read the rest of the essay, which is really fascinating. Some examples of these you'll be reading this week. One is by Lauren Trimbath Newberger, Drug Facts. Another is by Nancy McCabe, Can This Troubled Marriage Be Saved? A Quiz. And so let's look at some examples. And I also included one of mine here as well. It's not so much, I'm not going to talk about the language that's here. I want to talk about what they look like. So the first one of mine, which I wrote several years ago and published under my maiden name before I got married, was titled Job Description. At the time, I was working third shift on a children's unit at a behavioral health hospital as a direct care worker. And I was really frustrated about both how people would be hired and how I had been hired, having no clue about like the emotional labor and the emotional cost the job would bring. We had kids that had been horrifically abused. And it was one of those things, I was also trying to write about it and was constantly like frustrated by the comments, well, that must be a really rewarding career. And I bet that really makes you feel good about yourself. And like, well, it was very rewarding, but also very painful, like emotionally. And also it made me feel so powerless because I couldn't help. I couldn't do a lot to really help the situation the kids were in because we were at the mercy of the legal system. So I was trying to figure out how to make it work. And I was talking to a friend of mine and she said, well, why don't you just make it a job description? So I took the template from Microsoft Word. If you go on Microsoft Word and just look up templates, there's several. And I plugged everything into that structure. And I'll be glad to link it if anyone wants to read that one. The two that you'll be reading this week, Drug Facts and Can This Troubled Marriage Be Saved? A Quiz, are very similar. So Drug Facts was written by Lauren Trimbath Newberger, and you can see that picture here. That's the entire essay. She's writing about being a sex worker, trying to recover from her own past of abuse and harm and self-harm and trying to like be okay with herself. So she spent some time working as a sex worker. And for her, it was a way of like medicating herself. So she made it look like the drug fact warning label that you see on a medication bottle. Nancy McCabe, who I worked with for 2 semesters in grad school, she mentored me and she's amazing, wrote Can This Troubled Marriage Be Saved? A Quiz, because she was trying to write about the dissolution of a marriage and how she was trying to explain why the marriage failed, and the conflicting like feelings she had about whether or not to break up with this person, even though they didn't work well together. And somehow along the same time, she had gone to the doctor's appointment and seen those ladies' home journal magazine quizzes, ladies' home journal magazine, and there was a quiz: can this marriage be saved? And it was all of these like different multiple choice questions. And she's like, this is really interesting. And she kept thinking about those quizzes. So when she tried to write her essay, that seemed so complex and big, because deciding whether or not to stay in a relationship is a very multi-layered moment that's hard to fit into a single essay. She's like, if I put it and require that there are only certain questions and can only have a certain number of answers for each question, then it's going to force me to figure out what is most important about this situation. And for me, I found that incredibly helpful to hear it explained that way. Sometimes structure can force you to have to filter out your information and figure out what works or what doesn't work. Regardless of the structure you use, one thing I'll say is the earlier you start writing, the better. Play with different types of structure. Try to make it look like something else. Play with time. You may start with a chronological essay and realize it doesn't really work like that. If you're like me, your mind may be all over the place and you decide, you know what, I don't need a chronological essay. Maybe I need to segment it. Maybe instead of segmenting it, I need to try to use a hermit crab structure. Maybe that doesn't really work either, so I need to turn around and try a whirl of reflection. Regardless of the essay type or structure type you choose. Like I said, there's no wrong or right answer. Just be willing to play with it and experiment. The only wrong essay structure is the one you don't try. The only wrong essay draft is the one you don't write. So yeah, I hope this gives you a good quick overview for structure. There are entire books about structure. If this is something you're interested in, I would be glad to give you more resources. And I hope you have a good week and happy writing.